The Flash Season 2 Episode 11, The Reverse Flash Returns. This was a really crazy time-based episode, and it was pretty sweet. I think it was a very interesting look at just how they're doing time in this series and how they're doing the timeline and how killing a character or destroying, the lineage of a character, just the actual bloodline of a character can still leave that character alive, depending on who they are. I mean, in Eobard Thawne's case, it was insanely precise to about 7 people in the entire DC universe. There are only like 7, possibly 8. There might be like 10 people. I don't know all the Flashes, but there are quite a few. I guess I was only thinking of Flashes. There are, of course, a ton of evil speedsters as well. So there's probably like around a dozen characters. But being inside of the Speed Force, I think was really the only way they could have explained it, honestly. But I think it was pretty cool how they did that, because initially I thought it was just going to be basically, because I've seen this happen in some time-based things as well, where the timeline basically just didn't catch up with that person yet. Like, time is genuinely, the changes to time are faster than how we perceive time, but they aren't just instantaneous. And I've seen that happen in certain shows, and I thought that was how they were going to explain it, but instead it's kind of a lot more linked to, speedsters in general. And it's like, well, if he was inside of the Speed Force, it would kind of keep him alive. It would it would kind of protect him like a weird time bubble, and then poof, he's totally fine. So I thought it was kind of cool that that was their explanation as to how we get to see this character come back, and how this is his origin story, and how he learns about Barry, and how he learns, where he's from and what he can do. And this somehow, it really messed with my head after they did everything, because I was like, so it makes me wonder, is this the initial timeline then? Or is this not the initial timeline? Because if this is how, if this is how the Reverse Flash learns about Barry and everything, then that means it happened before. So, in the first season, they mention how Barry was supposed to become the Flash when he was in his 30s or something like that. So the Reverse Flash goes back in time, and when he takes over for Harrison Wells, he expedites the process insanely. It was supposed to happen, if I remember right, it was supposed to be 2020, so he changed it by 5 years or something, 5 or 6 years. And they mentioned oh, so this is already an alternate timeline and stuff. And it's like, well, if he existed, once he comes into this episode, and then they send him into the future so he can go back in time and start everything for the first season, it makes me wonder, well, maybe there wasn't a different timeline. This was always the initial timeline. It just seemed different. I mean, it's time travel, so it's just insane. But I thought that was really cool. It's an interesting thing. Of course, lots of crazy stuff with speedsters for this episode, because that, of course, was insane in general. And then we have Jay Garrick, who, of course, we knew was sick and he's dying and stuff. And Caitlin goes on the hunt for his doppelganger. And then by the end of the episode, we end up finding his doppelganger, and it's Hunter Zolomon, who is supposed to be Zoom from the comics. So I have no idea what they're doing with that. I think everyone's kind of in the same boat as okay, this is Hunter Zolomon, but we have Zoom, and it could just be a crazy Easter egg that's just something that they did, but I don't know. And before they showed that, before Jay was actually in in the final scene with Caitlin, and he's like, there's my doppelganger, and he went through the process of saying the reason he's not Jay Garrick is because he got adopted and all this other stuff. Before they got to that point, there were two things. It was either his doppelganger's dead, which I thought was kind of the obvious answer. It was he's probably dead. I thought it would have been interesting if his doppelganger was actually a kid. I thought that was kind of what they were going to do as well, because we haven't seen that before. Seemingly every doppelganger grows up exactly the same as every person. They can have a different life, but age-wise, they all grow up and everyone's the same age from Earth 1 and Earth 2. But I thought that would have been a really cool twist. It was like he's actually just a little kid or something. But the other thing I was thinking of was what if Jay Garrick was actually Zoom? Like, what if the Jay Garrick that we know, who we think is from Earth 2, is actually from Earth 1, and he didn't realize it, or something crazy like that, and they just couldn't ever find him, and it kind of would have left that open, but they gave a full explanation. But I was like, what if he's actually from Earth 1, and somehow he got transported to Earth 2, and he just didn't know that, and he just thought he was always, from Earth 2, or something crazy like that, which, superhero shows, not that crazy. But that doesn't end up happening, and so we have Hunter Zolomon. Could just be a reference, could be something real. It still could be a clue, because one of the other things was, even without Jay Garrick, even after they explained it, like, he is officially, from Earth 2. Even with that, like, and I thought this for a while, I was like, what if he was actually Zoom? Because I thought that before, like, if he was working with Harrison, that was one of my initial theories, was that, with him being a scientist, maybe he was working with Wells before, and something happened to him, and he kind of split into two different people, and Zoom is still him. And they could easily still do that, because Zoom is, if I remember right, Zoom is taller than Barry. And we still don't really know who it is, so it's not Barry, because we've all kind of established that because of just the stature of the character. So it's not Barry, unless they do like a muscle suit type of deal. It could still be Jay, if somehow they go with that, but they never, like, after a while I was like, okay, that's definitely not the case, because, Jay and Harrison never mentioned, like, oh, we used to work together. It's basically just always been, we kind of don't like each other, and that's pretty much it. So, like, that kind of went out the window a long time ago for me, where it was Jay Garrick split into two, and he ended up becoming Zoom. But I still don't know. Like, it was really interesting. Like, they do the Hunter Zolomon thing, and I was just like, that's pretty freaking insane that they did that, because that's supposed to be Zoom's name. So, could just be a reference that they're doing. I find that a little hard to believe, though, because you don't put a reference like that in the season where you have that character. You don't give the real life name of the main villain for that season without a reason. Like, it's hard for me to believe they just did that, like, yeah, they're fighting Zoom, so we just decided to give, Jay's Earth 1 counterpart, the Hunter Zolomon name for no apparent reason. So it could still be the case, definitely possible, but it's just one of those things I find it really hard to believe that it was just like, yeah, let's just throw that in there because it's really cool and stuff. I feel like there's got to be something there. It could be nothing, but that's just a crazy thing to throw in just to have a reference. Like, we kind of know who he is already. We know the name Hunter Zolomon. But I would assume most people do, at least, especially if you've been getting into the show. I don't know, I guess that would be interesting. A lot of people might not, if they just like the show and they don't dive at all into the comic storylines. I guess some people wouldn't, understand that reference whatsoever, but I don't know. I thought that was crazy. As soon as he said it, I was like, okay, there are just so many thoughts going through my head, and I can't even consider which ones may or may not be true, because it's just all sorts of ideas rolling around now. But I thought that was really interesting, and I can't wait to see if they do something with it. Even if they don't, it won't really make that big of a difference, obviously, but I just thought that was pretty crazy that they did that. So I personally feel like something's going to come of it. I don't know what, though. So that was interesting, very interesting. Still trying to figure out who Zoom is, of course. I'm kind of throwing Jay Garrick in there still a little bit. I was so sure early on, like, it just made perfect sense to me with him being a scientist and all that stuff, that if he worked with Wells and something happened, then, he would have been split in two, and that's how it happened. And it's still a possibility, because he does mention, and this was fairly early on this season, he does mention that he knew Wells created an explosion before the big explosion from the Earth 2 particle accelerator. And he was like, and I'm pretty sure exactly what he said was like, and that's when Zoom was born. Like, that's where he came from, was the first explosion. So, I don't know, maybe some just really weird stuff is going on, I don't know. But, like, whenever they do stuff with Jay, it's like, especially with the way they ended it, it brings up all the theories and possibilities for what Zoom is, or who Zoom is kind of a part of. Because based on what they've done with that character, it doesn't seem like he's just a human character. I feel like some weird stuff happened there, and he has to be like a part or multiple parts of multiple people, because it was like, poof, here's this villain that came from that that explosion, pre particle accelerator explosion, and it's just like that says a whole lot. Like it really says a ton of stuff. So I'm not sure what to expect from that, but I'm looking forward to whatever happens there. Rest of the episode, definitely fun. Barry dealing with the Reverse Flash, getting his revenge, in a sense at least, beating him up, and they actually have their speed run again, and he says, catch me if you can, which he did in the season 1 mid-season finale when we was chasing him across the city. And they did the same stuff, and it kind of showed, unfortunately, I think it shows that the Reverse Flash is still faster than Barry. Like, Barry caught him, but he caught him because he hit him at like an intersection. He didn't catch him because he was behind him, and he was fast enough to grab him. Like, they did exactly what they did in the first season, where he was reaching out to grab him, and then he shot up really fast. It was almost like the exact same scene where he was like right there to touch him, and then he like doubled his speed and he took off, and he couldn't get him. But they started going down different streets at different times, and that's how he caught him, because he slammed him from the side. But he still wasn't fast enough to just naturally catch him while running right behind him. So I thought that was very interesting. I was like, man, that kind of sucks. Like, he still isn't even as fast as the Reverse Flash. Like, he says, he mentions like, you're too slow, but it wasn't just like they were neck and neck. They were going, different paths, and he, caught him sideways. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to notice. Like, he's gotten faster. Also, oh man, before they do that, Barry running through the wall like it was nothing was the coolest thing ever. Because I was like, I remember, God, I don't remember where this was this season, but I was like, man, he hasn't run through anything lately, and that made me mad, because that's always been my favorite power, is when he vibrates through things, and he's running and stuff, and Eobard is about to kill the woman, the scientist, and he just comes through this wall. I thought for sure he was like normal, he'd come through a door or something, and then he'd like stop him or push him, and he's just like this, and it's just like boom, and he just comes through this wall out of nowhere. I was like, that was really cool. That was amazing to see, because we don't get to see him do that nearly enough. I certainly don't, because that's my favorite. That has always been my favorite thing of his, where he just runs through stuff. And I still remember the first time I ever saw that happen. I believe it was in Justice League, or it may have been in one of the Batman shows where they just had Flash in there, but I think it was Justice League. And he found the Batcave, and he's like, how'd you get here? He was like, oh, I just, I vibrate my molecules so fast I can phase through stuff. And he was like, I was just running around the city until I found it. And he was just running through Gotham, and he ran into the Batcave. He was like, oh, here it is. And that's how I found out he had that power. And ever since then, I was like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So it was 1 second, but I was so glad that they did that again in this episode, because it's my favorite power of his, despite the fact that he can travel through time. He can run through stuff, and it just looks super cool to me. So I was glad they did that, because that was really cool. And we haven't seen it since the first season when he ran through that truck. But it was just like, boom, and he just went straight through the wall, no problem. So hopefully we'll get to see him do that a little bit more, because I love it. It's just a really cool freaking move. But that was really fun to watch. Him beating up the Reverse Flash was definitely interesting and entertaining, and he got something out of it. I mean, ultimately, it sucked that he had to, but, in order to save Cisco, who was basically phasing through time and space, because they were altering, the timeline by actually capturing the Reverse Flash, he unfortunately does have to let him go, but I like the way they did it. It was pretty cool, and both Cisco and Barry kind of get their moments where, they talk to him, and we actually get, for people who didn't know the Reverse Flash's actual storyline, we get that from the comic books, and it's basically the same thing. Like, he idolized Barry, and then he found out he was meant to be the big villain, And then so he became the big villain, and it was like, man, that kind of sucks. Like, you don't have to do that, but he did. It drove him nuts, and that's what he did. And that's pretty much what we got from this episode. It's kind of what he says, like, I idolized you, and then I realized, I have to take everything from you. Like, every time you have more, that just means I have to take more from you. So it was really great. Like, I love the way they did it, and the way he was kind of cocky, even at the end of the episode, like, they have to let him go free, and he's like, I win again, Flash, and he just has to take off. And it was just really cool. I like the way they did that. Cisco getting an upgrade to his abilities, where we find out how his abilities trigger, and the fact that Wells has made a full-on device that instantaneously triggers vibes. That was pretty cool. I thought that was a great idea. I can't wait to see them utilize that a lot more. He does mention somewhere in it that it kind of messes with him a little bit. Of course, I think like everyone, I thought the nose bleeding thing was the side effect. Like, oh, he can't use it because basically it'll kill him. And then I was like, oh, surprise! It's actually because he's about to fade out of existence. And I was like, that was a nice. It was a twist, but it wasn't. I didn't even consider it as a twist. It was just like, oh crap, that is not what I thought was gonna happen. But I didn't really think of it like, no, that was just a full-on misdirection. Like, they kind of tricked us. Like, oh, man, he can't use the goggles because it'll kill him. And look at Harrison Wells. He's looking right at him, and he's like, clearly, he didn't give enough. He saw him bleed, and he's just like, all right. And he just turned and walked away like it didn't matter at all. Which I thought was hilarious. And that kind of made it, once again, seem even more like it was the goggles. And then, of course, him phasing out. It's like, okay, well, now it makes more sense. And maybe it'll be another misdirection, and it'll come back and be like, oh, it actually was the goggles, and it wasn't the fact that he was, phasing out of time. But either way, very interesting how they did that, and him getting to, use his powers in that way, and him seeing the future, which I always thought he could. I thought that was kind of established, but I guess everything that he had seen already was stuff that was either currently happening or took place in the past. But considering he had seen, to Earth 2 and stuff like that, I kind of always figured, like, well, yeah, you can see the future. I honestly assumed that pretty much everything that was happening, or everything he saw, was in the future. That's what I thought every single time he did that. And then they kind of established it, and I was like, oh, I guess that could have easily just been happening or have happened already. So, I just assumed it was always in the future because, it's called a vibe. It's not like this is what's happening. It's a vibe, so this is what's going to happen. That's just how I always saw it anyway. So I thought it was interesting that they kind of confirmed, like, no, you're seeing into the future and stuff. And I was like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal to me. I was like, I thought that's what he was doing anyway. But still really like seeing that. Really looking forward to Zoom coming back. I'm pretty sure in the preview he comes back in the next episode. So I'm looking forward to that like crazy. We also had, some emotional stuff in this episode with Iris and Joe and Wally and Francine and her, being close to death. And she'll probably be dying in the next episode, which is super sad. But also it's like, man, like, kind of don't like her because of everything that happened. And so we also get a human moment from Wally West and not a pure dick moment when he's talking with Iris. He was mad. Like, when he was mad at first, I was like, okay, I can understand him being angry and not wanting to talk. I didn't hate him for that first scene like I did most of the stuff from the other episode where I was like, he's just kind of a dick. So I was fine with that, and then he actually goes to Iris for help, and then he asks her to go with him to see their mom. And I was like, that was a really cool moment because they don't have a lot of time with her, and I thought it was cool. Like, that's what's going to kind of bring them together, is this loss and this broken structure of a family that's really, their mother's fault. And it was a complete 180 as well in this episode, which that kind of shows, at least for me personally, what I prefer from his character. And it's definitely that I want him to be mad at her and not Joe, because it's not his fault when she was the one that took off. And, that's pretty much all there is to it, especially when she knew she was pregnant to begin with. So, yeah, there's a lot there. I was glad that happened. I was glad that they had like a human moment with his character when he actually asked his big sister for help. And I think it was when they were at the auto shop and he mentions like, I just found out you know, I had a dad and a sister and stuff, and she's like, in case you forgot, that just happened to me too. Like, I just found out I have a mother and a brother as well. So it's like, you aren't alone just because, you know, you feel like you are. It doesn't mean you are. So I like that as well. All I could honestly think about the whole episode though was like, I wonder when he's gonna turn into, you know, Kid Flash. But I like the moments that they had. They're probably gonna do the death of Francine in the next episode if unless they carried on. It can't be more than 2, I would assume, considering they did the whole Joe coming in and saying like, I said my goodbyes. If she doesn't die in the next episode, it would have to be the one after. So she's going to be gone very soon, and I think we can expect a lot more crying in like the next 2 episodes for sure. If she, you know, if she passes in the next one, then obviously just the next one. But things are definitely going to change. There's going to be a huge shift in the West, you know, sort of family structure, and it's going to be permanent now. You know, once Francine is gone, we're going to have Wally West, and he's going to be in the show a lot more. So looking forward to that. But this was a really fun episode. Of course, want to know what you guys thought about it, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. And we got Reverse Flash back. Unfortunately, he was gone. I thought Reverse Flash was going to be in it for a while. When I saw like some of the stuff I'd seen, I was like, oh, he's going to be in it for a while. They're both going to go up against Zoom and all this other stuff. Sadly, that doesn't happen, which really sucks. But we got to see Reverse Flash. I definitely want to know if you guys enjoyed seeing him. Did you like the explanation, is what I would love to know from you guys. If you thought the explanation was good enough as to why he survived. Or if you think they should have just left it alone and done something totally different where, even though he still exists, he was like a different version. Because that was a theory I had, where he could be a good version of that character. And I still thought that in the beginning of this episode, because he seemed kind of happy. He's like, you know, Gideon, I found out, you know, what time the Flash is from. And I thought maybe he was going to be like, he can help us get to the future or something. And I was like, no, he's still just the bad guy. I was like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. I would have liked to have seen a good Reverse Flash who just couldn't stay in the time because he didn't want to mess with the timeline. But I want to know what you guys thought about it, so please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.